Professor Anton has another dialogue up. It's a dialogue with Inmendim, or Gary. He's a huge antinatalist on YouTube who is very difficult to fight with. he calls Professor Anton a fucking Nazi in the video. It's down there, mostly because Professor Anton was calling Gary a very religious person. Well, at the same time, he doesn't believe in God, but if you can understand that, it's down there. It's a pretty good thing. It's about an hour and a half long. I ended up watching the whole thing actually, but I want to talk about one little aspect of what Gary was talking about. He was this is basically a lot discussing about the whole antinatalism debate, and you know how Professor Anton is big on the gift metaphor, and Gary is big on the imposition metaphor, and they differ differently, which is why it's great for them to be in this dialogue here. But in the beginning, Gary makes a accusation to Professor Anton, saying that all of the things that you do, it is merely psychology and not philosophy, because he's referring to discussing about how Professor Anton has been talking about spirituality, the gift metaphor, how one can eventually become happy and eventually appreciate life, and all these things. A ton of videos by Professor Anton are going to be down there, and Professor Anton has really influenced my thought a lot, and I've also been on the same. I've not been on the same boat. I've been, going on a couple different tangents that he hasn't talked about, which means I'm talking about Marcel Proust, Epicurus, Nhat Hanh, the Zen Buddhist, talking about the whole idea of consciousness growth, which has not really been the way that he's been going, but Professor Anton has been really influencing my thoughts here, and but I want to just discuss this one little thing here. Gary makes the accusation to Professor Anton. Professor Anton has been using this whole spirituality and gift metaphor and all this stuff to criticize antinatalism, and Gary makes the accusation to Professor Anton, saying that all of that stuff that you're using to criticize antinatalism is merely psychology and less philosophy. And Gary says, I prefer to take out the psychology and use just philosophy to try to break things down as they are and take it for what it is. That's a somewhat lesser version of what Gary was saying. Gary is saying that it's best to just use philosophy, meaning trying to take things as the way they are, trying to explain them as they are, not trying to change them through, he's sort of, speaking as a philosophical realist here, saying that he wants to use philosophy to take things as they are, and do something about it thereafter. And they go off in this big other discussions, and but I want to discuss psychology and philosophy. Now, what I mean by psychology is I mean using Epicurus's techniques, using Marcel Proust's technique, using Thich Nhat Hanh's technique, using all those things to try to improve your attitude and to gain appreciation, to eventually look at the world through the gift metaphor. So it's basically through this whole psychological process you're moving towards the gift metaphor. This is what Gary is referring to as psychological in all these things Gary has been doing. Not in all the things Corey Anton has been doing. These things are psychological. It's in sort of a way of saying that you should look at the world through this sort of way, so that your happiness can be improved, and that you can improve yourself. It's trying to change the way that the mind originally sees things. Gary is basically bashing this, and I would like to criticize this here. I think now this makes me think a lot about Edmund Husserl and the logical investigations. He has the first volume of that book by Husserl is mostly a critique of psychologism. Psychologism is deriving everything through, interpreting everything through psychology. Psychologically interpreting everything, all philosophical things, all scientific things, through psychology. And when I made a couple of videos about that. It's also be on there. When I made a couple of videos about that, I was agreeing with Husserl that we should do this. And now that I'm thinking about it, I don't agree as much. I don't think that everything should be interpreted through psychology. But now that I'm thinking about it, as an idealist, I think everything is already through psychology, whether we like it or not. Everything, science, philosophy, politics, all these things are, in a way, psychological. Because how do we know about these things? Through the mind, the brain. We know about these things through consciousness. If we didn't have the mind or the consciousness, we wouldn't know about those things. So, what I'm thinking here is that if everything is known through the mind, through the consciousness, then everything is already interpreted, everything is already grounded in psychology. It's already grounded in psychology. And I think it's best not to, and I think Gary is separating psychology and philosophy here, and I think it's best not to do that. And here's why. If you are doing what Gary is doing by, just taking things the way they are, looking at them philosophically as you see them now, taking them for what they are and doing something about it thereafter, you are not questioning how you're seeing the world, which you're not questioning something which might very well be wrong. You don't know if it's wrong. You don't know how it differs. You don't know, as Professor Anton has put it, you don't know if you're looking at the world through shit-colored glasses. You don't know if you're looking at the world through different ways. So, I really don't think it's good to separate the two, philosophy and psychology. It's best to use both together. Use epistemology and psychology together, and then move forward from there. Once you have good sort of ideas about that you're looking at the world through the best way possible, or if there is any correct way, or what you think is the most correct way, if there is any, then you can move forward. And the thing is, I think the world is entirely subjective. And Gary is looking at things objectively. And I think that's wrong. Because if you look at the world objectively, then there's only going to be one way that you can possibly see it. And if you happen to have the mindset of Gary looks at the world through the imposition metaphor. If you happen to look at the world through that way, then you don't know what it might possibly be otherwise. Because if you look at the world through, if you look at the world through the way that you can possibly look through it, look at it with, because you have like two different ways. You can look at the world through the imposition metaphor or the gift metaphor, and since it's all subjective, I don't think that there's a correct way to look at it. But the correct way to look at it, I think, if there can be one, is what makes all of us more better off, or the best off, and that's when all of us are happy. And if we can make us more happy through psychological practices, then why not do that? Why not go through all that psychology and even epistemology first before going into the philosophical parts of it? I don't know. Those are just my thoughts, because I don't think that you should split up the two. I think my thought is that it's a flaw to separate psychology and philosophy. Because I think there's a lot of things in psychology and philosophy that parallel each other, and I think that the two can be joined at the end, and are mixed with each other. And they shouldn't be separated. Otherwise, you could lead to other flaws that you might not have run into if you would have solved psychological problems first. That's just me, without getting blunt about Gary. Just showing my thoughts on his couple of his remarks in his dialogue with Anton. So, any thoughts down there, please?